Raise your ya. Raise your right finger.
You're still spreading. Every time you go to right, raise your ya.
Raise your ya.
Longer, ya.
Raise your ya.
Just where you put ya. Right finger.
Raise your right finger.
Hello. I realize that there is a trend that's happening right now that has to do with voice stuff and vocal coaching. And as a vocal coach, I'm like, yep, I need to jump on this trend. So it's the raise your ya trend. But I want to jump on it from the position of a vocal coach and voice teacher because I am a vocal coach and voice teacher. Hello, I'm Onyie and I have a studio called Onyie's Voice Studio. And I've been teaching voice for a little over 18 years. So I just wanted to kind of explain why I use that exercise. I do use that exercise and I think a lot of voice teachers do, but I want to explain why and how I use it. When I use it as an exercise, I actually try to stay away from singing it per se and more like using it for a particular outcome as a tool to get a certain thing out of your voice or out of the performance. And so I wanted to kind of talk about really quickly what that is when I use it. Maybe it helps any of you who maybe want to use it as an exercise. Yeah, so here we go. So the purpose that I use this for is to help launch a voice into good placement, specifically often when I'm dealing with somebody who's doing a high mixed belt. A belt is basically taking that chest voice really high. When we're doing a mixed belt, it's usually taking the chest quite high, but also bringing some head voice into it to be safe, to get a cleaner, a more controllable tone. And to be able to sing more consistently for a longer period of time up in that place. Again, just overall, it's just a safer way to belt. So when you're doing a full mixed belt, the idea is to keep the sound very far forward so it doesn't turn into essentially a head voice where it almost becomes operatic. Ya, as opposed to ya, you know? We want it to be closer to that belty, that mixed belt, so it doesn't go into that floaty head. But using the head in that mixed belt is what keeps you safe, so that you're able to sing lots of high stuff for longer periods of time. So the Y, the letter Y of the ya actually helps launch you into that really great safe place that's very forward, very bright, very high, because we want to resonate in our mask when we're doing a mixed belt. And the mask is essentially like your cheekbones, between your eyeballs, your forehead, behind your eyes, like right here. That's where we want to send the sound for it to resonate easily and resonate well, but also safely. And so one of the things that helps launch you into that place is using that Y, because you're using that percussive ya. And that's what I use it for when I'm using it with my students. It's not simply ya, like just to say like, hey ya, like that's just a Y and it's just saying ya. We use it, at least in my lessons, to launch you. So it's ya, there's a percussive aspect to it. And before the ya, there's a little bit of an E, because even when you're going ya, like ya, there's a tiny E that comes before the Y, before the ya part, ya. And so that E also helps place the sound bright, forward, high. Ya. You see? Before all of that though, we take a good deep breath. What I've been seeing a lot of people do is just kind of launch into it, which is funny and fun to watch, but it's also dangerous if you're actually trying to sing, using it as an exercise. You want to make sure that your breath is connected to that launch. You take a wonderful deep breath. I teach below the belly button breathing, which means that you're thinking of taking that breath from below your belly button, which will automatically include your diaphragm and everything else. I used to be a personal trainer, and when I was a personal trainer, I learned a lot about the biology of the body and how it works. And when I learned how the breath works and the true breathing mechanics of the body, I realized, oh, we should be considering more when we're taking a deep breath in for singing. So I started doing the lower belly button breath, or below the belly button breath, because it automatically engages all the aspects of the breathing mechanism, which include your abdominal wall, your diaphragm, your rib cage, your lungs, your back, all that junk. So with that Y, it helps launch us into that yeah, yeah. And so when I'm working with my students, I use it as an exercise usually before we start actually properly singing, or as an exercise to help launch into a high belt that my students having to try to hit or struggling with. When we're using it as like a warm-up or an exercise, da 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 da, so I'll do ya 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 ya, and I still have to keep it very nice and forward and bright, and I have my students go way too far forward. Better to learn what it is to actually be able to resonate up there and feel what it feels like when it's too far than to be in that back really unsafe place, and then we can find that happy medium once you start to understand what you're allowed to access in the front of your face. When we're doing the ya 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 ya, we're gonna go super bright, so you can hear my speaking voice is quite dark. But if I'm doing ya ya ya, I'm gonna put it very bright and stay there the whole time. Ya ya ya. Ya 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 da da, ya 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 da da, ya 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 da da, ya 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 ya, and I'm gonna keep dropping that jaw and keeping it nice and bright and open and sending that forward sound, because you can also yaw yourself back into the back of your throat. Yaw, 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 yaw. It's still me doing the YA, the yaw, and I'm still using that Y, but it's catapulting me into the back of my throat to give that really dark tone that can become super unsafe if you go really high with it. So we want to stay forward using that ya to come forward. Ya, 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 ya. And I have to really work to keep it nice and bright up there. And then if I keep going, ya, 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 ya. It feels like nothing though, because it is all resonating forward, not in my throat, not in the back of my mouth, but all forward in the place where it loves to sit. So yeah. Okay, so now how do we put it all together? How do we get that tone of ya ya ya, even when we put the letters back together correctly? Funny thing about the right finger is that right already has that ah vowel. So the ya and the right work really well together. Now what I would do is make sure I'm replicating what I feel when I do the ya ya ya, not what it sounds like. Because a lot of times what we'll do is we'll try to replicate what we hear, and our ears deceive us. What we hear is a mixture of the sound outside of our head as well as the sound in your skull, because sound resonates and bounces around in your head. When you hear yourself like in a recording and you're like, that's not what I sound like, it unfortunately is, but it's what you sound like to everyone outside of your head. So we can't just go by our ears. The safest thing to do is to go by the correct feeling of when you are actually doing it correctly. If I'm doing raise your ya, 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 I have to remember what that feels like. Where is that resonating? Where am I feeling it vibrate? What does that feel like? How do I get that to happen when I'm doing right? Ya, 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 right, right, ya, right. I'm making sure that tongue is forward, and I'm gonna take a deep breath here. Raise your ya, raise your right finger,